Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the year is 1200. There are no asphalt highways, no glowing gas station signs, no GPS voice guiding you through every turn. There are no seatbelts, no shock absorbers, no air conditioning. When you step outside your door, the world beneath your feet is not a smooth, forgiving surface. It is a treacherous, unpredictable scar upon the earth. Mud, stone, roots and ruts, carved by 1,000 passing carts. The road stretches before you, not as a line on a map, but as a living, breathing obstacle. In the year 1200, to travel is to wage war against the land itself. And yet, across all of medieval Europe, from the bustling market towns of Flanders to the sun-scorched pilgrim trails of Iberia, millions of souls took to these paths every single year. They walked, they rode, they prayed, and they suffered. But the way they traveled, the dangers they faced, the pace they kept, and even what they believed about the journey itself was profoundly different from anything we know today. To step onto a medieval road is to enter a world ruled by uncertainty, shaped by fear, softened by faith, and organized around a rhythm that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten. This is the story of how medieval people actually traveled. To understand travel in the year 1200, we first have to understand the world that surrounded it. This was the heart of what historians call the High Middle Ages, a time of burgeoning towns, rising cathedrals, and an increasingly restless population. Kings and lords ruled over patchwork territories. Knights trained for war, monks copied manuscripts, and peasants, the overwhelming majority, rarely ventured more than a day's walk from their village. For the common man, the horizon was a boundary. But for those who did travel, the merchant, the pilgrim, the messenger, the exile, the wandering scholar, the road was a world unto itself, governed by its own brutal logic. There were no roadside motels as we know them. Mechanical clocks were rare and unreliable, and time was not measured in miles per hour, but in the position of the sun, the tolling of monastery bells, and the aching weariness of one's own legs. Travel was not a means to an end. It was an ordeal that transformed the traveller. The first and most inescapable reality of medieval travel was the road itself. The magnificent stone-paved highways of the Roman Empire, once the arteries of a lost world, had fallen into ruin. Over the centuries, their carefully fitted stones had been pried up by local builders, swallowed by encroaching forests, or shattered by relentless frost. What remained were often little more than muddy tracks, barely wide enough for two carts to pass. In the spring, these paths turned into rivers of clinging, stinking mud that could suck the boot right off a man's foot. In the summer, they became choking dust bowls, where every breath was a mouthful of grit and every step raised a pale, choking cloud. A traveller in 1200 did not walk on a surface, he wrestled with it. Horses strained and stumbled, carts sank to their axles, and the poor pedestrian, burdened with a heavy sack of belongings, moved at a pace that would make a modern walker weep with frustration. Perhaps 15 miles on a very good day, often far less. But the road was not merely an inconvenience. It was a genuine gauntlet of fear. The medieval countryside was not the manicured, safe landscape we imagine today. It was a wild, untamed frontier. Dense forests, dark, dripping and endless, harbored wolves that still roamed in vast, hungry packs. These were not the shy, distant animals we see in nature documentaries. They were a constant, lurking terror, their howls echoing through the night as a chilling promise of teeth and cold hunger. Worse than the beasts were the men. Outlaws, bandits, and the desperate remnants of broken armies haunted the lonely crossroads.
Everything in the wagon!
A traveller who fell into their hands could lose everything. His money, his goods, his clothes, and often his life. There were no police to call, no emergency services to rely upon. If you met a stranger on the open road, your hand instinctively went to your dagger, and your eyes scanned for escape routes. And then there was the stark, unavoidable absence of shelter. When the sun sank below the horizon, the true nightmare began. Medieval towns and cities lived in terror of the night. Their heavy wooden gates were locked at dusk, and the watchmen raised the drawbridges. If you arrived too late, you were locked out, left to the mercy of the open country and the bandits that prowled it. Inns existed, of course, but they were rare, costly, and frequently dangerous in their own right. If you were fortunate enough to find one, you entered a space that was loud, smoky, and crawling with life. You would pay a few coins for a place on the floor of the common room, or perhaps a spot on a large, shared bed alongside 3 or 4 other travelers you had never met. There was no privacy. There was no silence. The room echoed with the snores of exhausted men, the crackle of the central fire, and the squeaking of rats in the rafters. You clung to your belongings with one hand and tried to sleep with one eye open, because the man snoring next to you might just as easily slit your throat for a silver penny. For the vast majority of travelers, however, even a foul inn was a luxury beyond reach. Most slept outdoors. They would drag themselves off the muddy track into a thicket or under a gnarled oak tree and huddle against the cold. A traveler's greatest treasure was his woolen cloak, thick, rough, and smelling of sheep and wood smoke, which served as both blanket and pillow. The fire was sacred. Gathering dry wood, striking a spark with flint and steel, and coaxing a tiny flame into a roaring blaze was a nightly ritual of survival. That fire kept the wolves at bay, offered a sliver of warmth against the biting frost, and allowed for a simple meal of stale bread, hard cheese, and perhaps a piece of salted pork. They ate in silence, staring into the flames, listening to the sounds of the forest, acutely aware of how small and fragile they were. But what did these travelers believe about their arduous journeys?
The faithful have embarked on this
In the year
arduous
1200, travel was not a secular activity. It was a profoundly spiritual one. The single most important category of traveler was the pilgrim. Tens of thousands of men and women, from peasants to kings, walked hundreds of miles to venerate the relics of saints. The road to Santiago de Compostela, the paths to Canterbury, the trails to Rome. These were not just routes, they were acts of penance, devotion, and hope. A pilgrimage was a spiritual workout, a way to suffer here on earth to avoid suffering later in purgatory. Every blister, every scrape, every sleepless night soaked in rain was a prayer. The road itself was a purgatory, a temporary state of trial that would, they believed, cleanse the soul. They left markers along the way, small crosses scratched into stones, humble chapels built at the peak of a difficult climb, and shrines where a weary soul could kneel and ask the heavens for strength. The landscape was littered with these holy landmarks, creating a map not of geography, but of divine mercy. For the merchant, the motivation was different, but the danger was the same. They traveled in heavily armed caravans, their carts groaning under the weight of wool, salt, iron, or wine. They journeyed to the great fairs of Champagne, the trading ports of Italy, the wool markets of Flanders. Theirs was a world of profit and peril. One lost shipment to bandits could ruin a lifetime of toil. They carried their money in leather belts sewn beneath their tunics, and they trusted no one. The rhythm of their life was dictated by the seasons. Summer was the preferred time for the long, arduous treks through the mountain passes, where snow would block the routes for half the year. Winter travel was a nightmare of freezing rain, icy paths, and the constant threat of starvation if the supplies ran out. There is a profound contrast here with our modern mechanized world. Today we distance ourselves from the journey. We sit in climate-controlled boxes, listening to podcasts, disconnected from the landscape blurring past the window. We measure a good trip by how quickly we arrive. But for the medieval traveler, the journey was the entire point. It transformed you. It stripped away your pretensions. A wealthy lord on horseback might be humbled by a broken wheel. A proud knight might be reduced to begging for bread.
It looks delicious.
The road was a great equalizer, reducing all men to the same aching feet, the same empty belly, the same desperate hope for a friendly face at the next turn.
And there he stood.
Strangers
face
helped each
to
other.
face with the
They shared their
largest boar.
fires, their stories, and their meager provisions. It was in these moments of shared hardship that the most profound human connections were forged. A camaraderie born of mutual vulnerability.
And what of the landscape itself?
It was not a fleeting view to be consumed in an instant. The medieval traveller memorized the land. He knew each hill, each treacherous ford, each village by the smell of its smoke. The pace was excruciatingly slow. 100 miles could take a week. But in that slowness, there was a connection to the earth that we have utterly lost. He felt the wind change direction. He smelled the rain long before it fell. He noticed the first shoots of spring and the yellowing leaves of autumn. He was part of the natural cycle, not a detached observer floating above it. He moved with the sun, rose with the dawn, and surrendered to the night. He woke in the middle of the night on the hard ground, shivering, perhaps thinking of his home, and looked up at the vast, starry sky, unblemished by streetlights, bright and terrifyingly infinite. That moment, between first sleep and second, was one of profound isolation and profound clarity. He was just a speck on the earth, a wanderer under the stars, utterly dependent on the mercy of God and nature. The transformation of the journey took centuries. Gradually, roads were improved, bridges were built. The invention of the carriage brought a semblance of comfort. The rise of the merchant class and the growth of cities made travel more common, but it never lost its essential danger. It was not until the age of railways and then the automobile that we finally conquered the tyranny of distance. We banished the mud, the wolves, the bandits, and the cold. We sealed ourselves in steel and glass and told the landscape to move faster. We reclaimed the hours lost to the road and gave them back to productivity. But in doing so, we may have lost something precious, the slow, contemplative space that our ancestors took for granted. So let us return one last time to the year 1200. Imagine the close of a single day on the road. The sun sinks low over a vast forest. The air grows cold and damp. A lone traveller, his face weathered, his cloak torn, stumbles into a clearing. He gathers fallen branches and strikes a spark. The smoke rises, spiraling through the dark canopy, a silent signal of human presence in the wilderness. He eats his dry bread and stares into the flames. The sound of running water from a nearby stream fills the air. There is no phone to check, no schedule to consult, no destination to rush towards. There is only the fire, the night, and the quiet endurance of the human spirit. He wraps his cloak tighter and drifts into his first sleep, the distant howl of a wolf threading through his dreams. He will wake in the dark, look up at the countless stars, whisper a prayer for the road ahead, and then sink back down into his second sleep, trusting that the morning will bring him one step closer to his goal. For 800 years, the world has transformed beyond all recognition. We have conquered mud, speed, and distance. And yet, when we take a journey, we are doing the same thing that medieval traveller did. We are surrendering ourselves to the unknown, trusting in our own endurance and hoping for a safe arrival. The car you sit in may be faster, the road smoother, the night brighter, but the act of travel connects you to every human being who ever placed one foot in front of the other and trusted that the path would lead somewhere. Tonight, when you think of the road, somewhere deep within you stirs the same ancient rhythm that guided the medieval wanderer. And in that quiet moment, between the ignition and the destination, the year 1200 is not so very far away after all. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the medieval road. Before you go, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what you enjoyed most. Was it the dangers of the forest, the communal inns, the spiritual pilgrimage, or something else entirely? And most importantly, tell me what forgotten corner of the past you would like to explore next. Until then, travel safe and remember, history is closer than you think.